America's plan to destroy the cartel. I know this is gonna be this is probably gonna be the last one.
Helicopters take off from Fort Bliss in Texas and fly a few miles across the border into Mexico. They touch down outside a nondescript single-story building that intelligence believes is being used by the cartel for manufacturing fentanyl. The door is blown. 5 Sicarios are eliminated. The squad leader finds intelligence on a laptop of the location of another cartel facility up the road. Just then, an FPV explosive drone slams into one of their helicopters. They blow the equipment in place and the team jumps into the remaining helicopter. An MQ-9 Reaper drone flying overhead fires a missile, flattening the entire building. On January 20th, 2025, United States
This actually happened?
Government officially designated Mexican drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, which now opens up the door for the possibilities of missions exactly like this to occur.
This evening, the president declared a national emergency at the southern border.
President Trump officially designating them as foreign terrorist organizations.
What historical examples can we examine to better understand how this situation might unfold? What would military action against the cartels look like at the tactical level? How might the cartels respond? And are we finally going to get Sicario 3? A series of 10 executive orders signed by President Trump into law outline this crackdown, and within them are a lot of surprising changes. One of the most important to understand, I think, is the United States government's declared the border with Mexico as an emergency, which orders the U.S. Armed Forces to repel forms of invasion at the border. This includes illegal migration and cartel drug trafficking.
And since this implementation of it, apparently the amount of people coming across the border has halted substantially.
Declaring an emergency, it will change the current situation in a few ways. But before we get into that, I want to tell you about this video sponsor. PDS Debt provides personalized debt solutions, and this would have been a game changer for me back when I was underwater with military being put into action here. It's logistics, its ability to bring material on site. According to an internal US government memo obtained by CBS News, right now they're considering sending 10,000 additional soldiers to the roughly 2,500 already stationed there. The memo revealed more about the plan, stating that the Defense Department may convert its bases into holding facilities for detained migrants and will use military transport planes to send migrants back to their home country.
The first thing that stood out to me right off the bat is the type of units that are being sent gives us some kind of clue of what's going on here. These are some of America's top infantry units, the 82nd Airborne, the 10th Mountain Division, and 500 engineers from the Marines. This is meant to send a signal to the cartel, I think. Shortly after the changes, cartel gunmen opened fire on American Border Patrol agents.
I heard about this.
Agents on Fronton Island, which has been nicknamed Cartel Island because the cartel often gallivants through there. The gunmen were in the middle of trying to smuggle migrants across when they opened fire on the agents. Border Patrol, of course, fired back, causing the cartel to flee, and there was no casualties, but it's clear indication to me personally that the cartel is pushing boundaries and testing what the response of the new administration will be. Cross-border gunfire between rival factions in the cartel isn't unheard of, but what's really unusual, I think, is the cartel.
Man, we got a whole GTA server going at the border of America and Mexico right now. This GTA server is out of control.
Directly targeting Border Patrol agents now. So there's a misunderstanding here with a lot of people. Technically, designating cartels as FTOs does not immediately grant authority to use the US military against the cartel, but it does open the door to it, and let me explain why that is. So they're actually prohibited from doing any law enforcement roles under the Posse Comitatus Act, but possibly not for long, because there's a part of the emergency at the border executive.
The thing is, Elliot, who are we fooling exactly? American elites are responsible for drug cartels, and these drug cartels are biting them. Are you aware that the drug money is converted to white through the Vatican? While Trump really took action, especially when in Canada and Mexico are planning to retaliate. If Trump is the anti-deep state, then why is he smashing China's ass when he's trying to tender to the CCP susfell? I think Trump is just trying to renegotiate deals with China, and in terms of that, like, don't conflate the two. So look at China differently than we do Canada and Mexico. Canada and Mexico are much more higher up on the list, priorities or problems. I think China isn't so much a problem, just been fucked over with bad business deals. So I think Trump is going to negotiate better business deals. And honestly, I think it's going to work in hand of India. I think India and America are going to have a beautiful relationship going into this next decade. This is something that's very interesting because I earlier administrations during the Clinton administrations, all the Clinton administration, they're the ones who really started the drug problem in America and funding a lot of this drug issue. So this is a problem that America created. So America's going to have to fix it.
Of order that I think a lot of people might have missed. If you look at section 6B, it says, quote, within 90 days of the date of this proclamation, the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Homeland Security shall submit a joint report to the President about the conditions at the southern border of the United States and any recommendations regarding additional actions that may be necessary to obtain complete operational control of the southern border, including, and this is the important part, including whether to invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807.
Holy shit.
End quote. I think that paragraph is almost more significant than the FTO designation, which is already huge.
Yeah.
And that's because if the Insurrection Act ends up being recommended, it will allow US troops to pull triggers and arrest cartel members. So the logic here is that by first designating them as foreign terrorist organizations, it builds the case that there's a justification in using the Insurrection Act, which would in turn allow special forces to knock on cartel doors. Well, probably they won't knock, but you know what I mean. The Insurrection Act is one of the most powerful emergency acts that the US president can use. It would essentially let the government to go weapons-free ham style on the cartels. It would take Congress and the courts a long time to try to revoke it in a difficult process if they even wanted to try. So what would that look like? The Insurrection Act has a complicated history from being used against the KKK during the Reconstruction era in the early 1870s. It was used to combat widespread terrorism by the Klan against African Americans. And to me, that sounds like a pretty widespread
crazy propaganda. Look at that bottom image. That's insane.
By the Klan against African Americans. And to me, that sounds like a pretty badass mission to be on. But there's also been kind of less cool uses. It was used to persecute Native American tribes and capture fugitive slaves, which in hindsight, not so great. It's not just the Insurrection Act, though. President Trump also stated that he would invoke the Alien Enemies Act, which would further grant the US military the ability to deport foreign gangs and cartel members. To get a better idea of what using special forces against the cartel would look like, I spoke with former Green Beret from 1st Special Forces Group, Nate, from the YouTube channel Valhalla VFT. Nate has experience running counter-narcotics missions in Afghanistan.
The biggest one that we don't see getting talked about in all these videos right now about, you know, Delta Force to smash the cartels and special forces to destroy the cartels. Okay, this isn't Iraq in 2006. This isn't Fallujah, where we can just do call-outs into Tijuana or wherever, a city, and then just be like, if you aren't out by tomorrow at noon, everybody dies inside. This is an allied nation. Okay, so civilian casualties is a massive consideration for any type of operation or direct operation that we're going to do against the cartels, because keep in mind, the cartels are inlaid through everything, through cities, through the government, police forces. Tons of people make their money through the cartel system. Really, what we'll have to do is assist the Mexican military or police in whatever they think is the appropriate way to do that. Keep in mind, as Green Berets, that's all we do. There's only 12 of us on a team. We can't do anything unilaterally, really. It's not realistic.
As an American, this is a lot to unpack. Not sure how I feel about this exactly, right? You don't want the cartels operating with impunity any longer, but there's also some possibly downsides to this. Usually when I'm unsure about something, I like to make a pros and cons list to suss it out. So for the pros, we have disruption of cartel operations, reduction of drug flow, increased intelligence gathering, improved regional security, potential humanitarian relief by helping weaken cartels that subject local communities to violence and exploitation.
That's actually a very good point.
Possibly more control of weapons trafficking from the United States to Mexico. Those are all, I like that. Now, the cons. could violate Mexico's sovereignty and cause strain in relations with our largest trading partner, could increase civilian casualties, retaliation from cartels against US assets, could escalate violence and create more chaos, could become just a long, prolonged engagement that's similar to past failed US military interventions like in Afghanistan. And
I just feel like Trump won't let anything be prolonged. I feel like this is all going to be about efficiency, especially with Elon being in the Department of Government Efficiency. He'd be like, yo, let's clean this shit up. Let's,
Iraq could have a negative economic impact. All right. So the
Go
pros and the cons list
yeah.
hasn't really made it any more clear. Let's take a look at lines on the map to see
a
if
negative economic impact. I mean, these negative on the cons, it's just a bunch of could. Like, it's just like how probable on there. And like Mexico is not, I don't see it. They're definitely not our largest trading partner. There's no way that's a factual statement.
Might tism any better and shed some more light. To give you some context visually on what the problem looks like, this here is a map that shows where the Sinaloa and Juarez cartel control sections of the territory that extends along the border. So these executive orders are aimed at keeping that contained, but the exact scope of the mission is going to be determined in part by the Secretary of Defense. According to a former U.S. Special Forces operator who spoke to the Rolling Stone magazine, this is how U.S. military action against the cartels might play out. U.S. Special Forces would run vehicle interdiction missions where they would track targets to their headquarters, and then they would execute raids on high-value targets. Intelligence gathered from mobile phones and interrogation of captured fighters would lead to a mission cycle or a core gameplay loop that would rinse and repeat until a
core gameplay loop. Yep. They're talking about setting up a GTA server and they're just going to run that shit.
List of the top cartel leaders were absolutely eliminated. From there, they would start to move down to lower ranking foot soldiers.
That's a huge one that we're going to have to deal with, is getting that intelligence. Even in Afghanistan, the majority of our intelligence, human intelligence, came from Afghanis who would sell out the Taliban for money and things like that, right? So it's not as easy as we're going to war with cartels, we're going to go get them. Like, okay, who? Okay, where? These questions have to be answered before we could ever consider
who, what, where, and when.
Sending in U.S. special operations to take down cartel syndicates and bosses.
In the past few years, we've witnessed cartels turn into private armies.
It's not like the U.S. can send that. It's not like it's COD Mobile Lobby where the U.S. can just say, hey, we're sending you an invite. We're going to handle this shit right now. Come to our server. We'll play best 2 out of 3. We'll host first. You can host second. And then we'll figure out who hosts third.
With
don't work like
cars, vehicles, attack drones. There's full-on battles between the cartel and the Mexican army. And I can't show the footage here due to restrictions, but I have uncensored combat analysis on Pepperbox TV. If you're interested, the link is in the description. To test it out, you get a 14-day free trial. It's $7.99 a month after that, and you can cancel any time. So if the FTO designation doesn't allow for use of force just yet, what does it allow for? According to a former DEA agent, Mike Vigil, quote, number 1, it allows the US government to seize bank accounts and properties belonging to these designated groups in the United States. Secondly, it would sanction American citizens if they have any ties to businesses belonging to these designated groups. And thirdly, it tries to prevent them from coming to the United States, end quote.
But it also allows for using military intelligence.
You're not wrong.
Everybody thinks that like we have the CIA, right? So we just know where everybody is around the world, and we know where all the cartel
definitely
bosses
not wrong.
are. Most likely, we probably don't know shit in Mexico.
Since the pros
cartels
and cons
get weapons
list
from America, I know.
Really solve
so
this,
did ISIS. I mean, we funded so much of them.
Defense briefing can. Welcome to the briefing. Please be seated. Thank you.
Thank you.
First slide.
Thank you for the chair.
I think the best way to understand what's happening is by using a historical frame of reference. This actually is not unheard of, and there is recent historical precedent that we can examine here. In 1997, the United States government labeled the Colombian drug cartel, FARC, as a foreign terrorist organization.
What the FARC?
After that, there was increased military aid and cooperation between the two by a heck of a lot. Because since then, the US government gave $12 billion in equipment and training to fight the FARC organization. It was called Plan Colombia, and it's ultimately credited with helping deal a decisive blow to the Colombian cartel. One of the key aspects was they didn't deploy American boots on the ground in large numbers or conduct missile strikes. Instead, they worked together to embed U.S. Special Forces, small teams, and CIA officers into the Colombian security force to help advise them on missions and give them actionable intelligence. It'd be like if you were playing a video game and someone is whispering over your shoulder, telling you where the bad guys are located. You'd have a huge advantage.
You're telling me they got hacks?
You'd be like having a wall hack. My producer Armando and I spoke with Francisco Santos, who was Colombia's vice president from 2002 to 2010. He was instrumental with advancing Plan Colombia and its policies, and it was a little surreal to talk to a former vice president from Colombia.
Colombia was almost a failed state in 2002. 180,000 hectares of coca. A third of the country was controlled by the paramilitaries, a third of the country was controlled by the guerrillas, and a third of the country was controlled by the state. With Plan Colombia going after drugs and going after the guerrillas which were involved in the drug business, in 8 years we changed the country. They were really relegated to far areas of the country.
Are we sure?
They didn't have the impact that they were having. Yeah, so it can be done. It needs political capital. It needs results.
But it took time to start to see positive results. Jan Schakowsky, a U.S. Congresswoman, said in 2003, quote, Plan Colombia was supposed to reduce Colombia's cultivation and distribution of drugs by 50%, but 6 years and $4.7 billion later, the drug control results are meager at best, end quote. However, that didn't stay the case because 7 years after she said that, by 2010, homicides had been cut in half, terror attacks reduced by 90%, and U.S. exports to Colombia quadrupled to $15 billion. By April 2010, former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates said, quote, in just a few years, Colombia has achieved a remarkable, indeed historic transformation in the security arena that few would have thought.
Colombia is going to be the next country where the government fails, just like Syria, because the government is very naturalistic and the CIA does not like this. Colombian illegals were not being taken, not because they are not illegals, but the CIA agents already tested a method in Syria, South Korea, and Japan, etc. You think?
Not possible. From a nation under siege from drug trafficking organizations and military groups to a country quickly becoming a linchpin of security and prosperity in South America, end quote.
Good night,
but
guys.
I think a lot of that ended up getting swept under the carpet. You didn't really hear about it because of the war on terror was so big in the news at the time. But by 2016, a peace accord between the Colombian government and FARC was reached, and FARC agreed to dissolve itself and disband. It's hard to imagine hearing the Mexican cartel disbanding, but that's the goal here that I think we should be aiming at with these executive orders. By 2021, the US government removed FARC from the foreign terror list. Nothing's perfect by a long shot, but there are, of course, a lot of factors that went into that happening, and it's not an exact one-to-one comparison, but it's close. Because if we want this to succeed, what we're going to need to do is have clearly defined goals, a clear end game for what success against the cartels mean.
That, I think, is a good end goal. I think one of the complications with that in Mexico is it's not like the FARC in Colombia. You have 10 different cartel organizations that are all competing.
But look, one of the problems of the U.S. is
that's exactly what my thoughts. Like if you get rid of MS-13, okay, cool, and the cartel they sold, it's gonna come in, and if not, then somebody else. Like there's too much diversity and too much culture and too much of like an operation setup that you have to go in there and you have to eradicate them off the face of the planet.
That they hate to learn from success. They love to learn from failure. So you go to the State Department, they have tons of books on Iraq, where we failed, Afghanistan. You go and see, hey, and what do you have about Plan Colombia? A 1-inch folder with some memos. That's really, that happened to me when I was ambassador.
But we need buy-in from the Mexican government and the people there on those goals. I think one of the mistakes we made when we got involved in Iraq was not understanding what the people wanted there and not understanding what the criteria was for mission success. Whether cracking down on the cartels with military force will be effective or cause blowback will depend on how it's executed and how the Mexican government and people feel about taking the fight to the cartels. I, for one, was surprised to learn that according to a Mexican newspaper, Reforma, a poll that they conducted found 46% of their respondents, nearly half had a favorable view of Mexico collaborating with the United States to fight the drug cartels.
I saw that,
guess
Arma.
It shouldn't be surprising when we consider the fact that nearly a quarter of people in Mexico have been personally affected by cartel violence in their lives. The poll found that 75% of respondents believe the best way the United States can help Mexico fight insecurity was a collaborative scheme relying on joint operations. It's also telling that only 24% chose undercover operations by U.S. security agencies. Polls are, of course, fickle creatures, but these numbers suggest to me that if we want buy-in from the largest stakeholders, then working with Mexican security agencies is the way to go. It's like my old squad leader used to always say, fight smart, not hard.
The perspective of people in Latin America is like, what matters to them? What do they want? What do they not want?
They want safety. It's like in the US, they want safety. They want to feel safe. You don't want a drug trafficker giving you safety. You want the state to give you so in the end, it's the same. The problem is that you
don't want the mafia providing the safety. Ideally, you want a government, because ideally the government is more about the people than it is about the product. However, when the government looks at the people as a product, then we got an issue.
Really strong police institutions. Many of our countries don't. I have no doubt they're going to start using the drones to get many of those high value targets. Okay, so you're screwing with us? There you go. Because that's become a new way of exerting pressure, of creating having a political effect.
How do you get that buy-in? You have to provide some type of value. What is the value opportunity cost here? If I'm a politician that gets paid off by the cartel, what's the value in it for me to want to say, hey, yeah, let's clean this up?
Now that we're talking about it, I feel like it just could be very expensive. Like in Afghanistan and in Iraq, for sure. I went on missions where we would hand out hundreds of thousands of dollars to local sheikhs. And it's basically, we said it was grant money for your farm or this or that, but really it's work with us, not the insurgents. And I don't know, if we're really serious about doing this mission in Mexico, I would think that might look similar to that.
There's something like 1.6 million Americans
it's always about the
living
money.
in Mexico,
always about money, power, and control.
And nearly 40 million Mexicans living in the United States. This is a joint problem that requires a joint solution. And who better to join forces with than our allies and number one trading partners in Mexico? Who wants the destruction of these cartels more than the Mexican people themselves who suffer at their hands? The Mexican army has fought bravely against the cartel.
I just understand that the Mexican president and Trump don't often get along, so I'd be very curious to see how much cooperation they really have.
We usually only see the headlines of cartel violence, but if you monitor the situation closely, the Mexican army routinely wipes the floor with cartel gangs when it comes to battles won on a tactical level. The problem is, fighting an insurgency takes more than just bullets and stacking bodies, as we learned in Iraq and Afghanistan. Is America's goal to get the cartels to disarm and disband? Then some kind of agreement would likely need to be made to turn the cartels into legal political entities in exchange for laying down their weapons. This has been done in history, is filled with examples of this, of armed groups transitioning away from violence. Other cartel and insurgent groups have followed.
That's an interesting take.
Similar paths. I believe the greatest threat to a joint operation is corruption, which spawns distrust between the two.
A mayor, they buy the police, they corrupt the police, and they have a territory they can move through. Two, they can control territories. In Mexico and in parts of Colombia and in parts of Argentina, they control territories. They intimidate so hard.
They intimidate us, my friends. They got the police.
Pushed back or bought.
Mexico has arrested hundreds of their own officers, judges, politicians, military generals for taking bribes from the cartel. Plata o plomo is a Spanish phrase that translates to silver or lead. It essentially means money or bullets. It's used to convey a forceful ultimatum from the cartel where someone's given a choice to cooperate with a bribe, plata, or face violent consequences, plomo. And it originates from a threat that Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar used to make against government officials if they didn't take his bribes.
plata o plomo. Ustedes eligen.
The United States has prosecuted thousands of their own customs agents and other authorities as well. What we can't do, I think, is let the cartel push us to see each other as enemies. The United States and Mexican forces should be united against the common enemy of the cartels because we both have a lot to gain by weakening them. How will the cartels choose to respond to increased pressure on them? According to a CIA officer who spoke to Rolling Stone magazine, past administrations had turned down the option to use CIA ground branch due to the potential risk of cartel retaliation against the operators' families inside the United States. The cartels could also choose to attack Americans living abroad or tourists visiting or energy plants or oil infrastructure in the United States.
Yeah, but if they did that,
they're considering.
I think the scariest thing
it would be game over for them
to understand is that it doesn't matter if you close the border completely, because there are tens to hundreds of thousands of cartel members
who are already here
in America, living in America right now. What will they start doing? Terrorist tactics in America.
I'll give you a story of cartels. When Pablo Escobar killed a justice minister in Colombia, all hell went loose. If the Mexican cartel does that, oh, they're going to pay a very high price. So they have to understand, and as a Mexican government, you have to raise the cost and saying, you go after us. Look at what's going to happen to you here, 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 here. And I think that's part of what is going to be. We're going to see it in probably this year.
The official executive order, it's published online, and I think it reveals a lot about what we're seeing here. It reads, international cartels constitute a national security threat beyond that posed by traditional organized crime.
It's so scary because we've never really had anything like this happen on American soil. We had 9/11, which was tragic, but Medellin will again come into the news because the drug war will again start because Mexican cartels used America to strengthen the base, and then said fuck the CIA while they started to decrease and cut the money that America used to get. Why is America pissed? Not because of the drug problem, but money problem. Oh, of course.
With activity,
money, power, control. You fuck with one of those three things, you're messing with something that's very complicated. It's always about those three things.
Is encompassing convergence between themselves and a range of extra hemispheric actors, from designated foreign terrorist organizations to antagonistic foreign governments. They're talking, of course, about how the cartel cooperates with Chinese companies and likely the Chinese government to produce massive amounts of fentanyl. To me, though, the million-dollar question is how much of this will be by, with, and through the Mexican government? Meaning, will Mexico choose to cooperate with the United States to combat the cartels? And I think there's a lot of new evidence to indicate it could go either way. The United States and Mexico
it could go either ways, and it's not looking very likely.
Have decades-long history of working with each other. America sent $3.3 billion worth of aid to help train and equip Mexican soldiers through the Medellin program to fight the cartel. This initiative went from 2008 to 2021. Putting aside its effectiveness, it shows that the two nations can and have cooperated on security in the past. Delta Force, the DEA, and other American experts have been welcomed by Mexican authorities in the past to help give advice on high-profile counter-narcotics operations. One reportedly led to the capture of El Chapo. One of the biggest proponents of labeling the cartels foreign terrorist organizations has been Congressman Dan Crenshaw, a former Navy SEAL. He frequently stresses the importance of working together with Mexican security forces as partners. He also states that it's a two-way road, and the United States needs to cut down on the flow of weapons into Mexico, while Mexico needs to cut down on drugs into the United States.
Now, the way we do this in places like Colombia, we have done it for decades, is we of course work bilaterally with them. If you go in unilaterally, that means that we've exhausted all other diplomatic options.
The Mexican government has stated they strongly oppose any actions that are taken without their approval inside their nation. On January 21st, Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum came out and she gave her first remarks about these developments. And she said that they would not object to
Again, you've already explained that Mexico is China's puppet.
Asylum cases being heard in Mexico.
That's why I'm like, I don't have much confidence
on
in
security matters. so long as Mexico's sovereignty is respected. Her exact words were, "They can and should act in their territory, they in their territory, we in our territory," end quote. This response appears to show some early indication that there's room for cooperation. I think part of designating cartels as foreign terrorist organizations is a symbolic move. It'll put additional pressure from the international community to act against them, or at least not cooperate with them. The White House executive order states that justifications for why the cartel fits the bill as an FTO is, quote, "In certain portions of Mexico, they function as a quasi-government entity, controlling nearly all aspects of society," end quote. The fact that they control parts of the government's function is a huge justification for why they're able to designate them as a foreign terrorist organization. Goes on to say the cartel's activities threaten the safety of American people, the security of the United States, and the stability of the international order in the Western Hemisphere. But there's a big reason why Mexico might not be excited about this or want to get on board. It's partly because it could have an impact on them economically. This designation will have knock-on effects, potentially impacting foreign investments from, say, the United States into Mexico.
And as Naman has been saying this whole video, it always goes back to the money.
It means that payments made to any company that has cartel affiliation in their organization can be seen as sending material support to a terror organization. So if you own a business that's working with companies in Mexico, if it turns out that they have cartel connections, you could be going to jail for a very long time. Considering just how wide the cartel network is, they employ some 175,000 people. This means that there are huge liabilities when choosing to work with a Mexican company, because you better hope that you're vetting them correctly and doing your due diligence and that they don't have a cartel connection. The reason I think this is an interesting time for this to happen is because right now, the most powerful Mexican cartel is in the middle of a kind of civil war. The Sinaloa cartel is fighting themselves. Two rival factions within that organization have been at war with one another over the past few months. To me, this raises a question, a huge question, of whether they will choose to unite against the US government or if it'll be easier to destroy them in this weakened moment. We know that currently the cartels fear retaliation from American forces. In 2023, two US tourists were killed by them when they were mistaken for drug smugglers. The Gulf Cartel immediately did an apology and turned in their own member who was responsible for what happened. But at this point, it might be a little late for an apology now. Former Special Forces soldier Brian Michael Jenkins, current senior advisor to the RAND president, put it this way, quote, "The terror label seems to have great appeal not because it expands legal authority, but because it sends a loud message. People view terrorism as more heinous than ordinary crime. Calling it drug trafficking, kidnapping, and murder by themselves doesn't adequately reflect the national outrage of some. The terror label elevates the issue, suggesting that more must be done to prevent these kinds of acts in the future, and that in this case, if Mexico does not do something, the United States will. Applying a terror label raises the possibility of military action," end quote. As the famous Kissinger quote goes, "The guerrilla wins if he does not lose. The conventional army loses if it does not win." Everyone agrees on what the problem is. The drug epidemic has been horrible. Nearly everyone, myself included, have lost someone close to us or know someone who's died from a drug overdose. There was a period of several years where we were losing 90 to 100,000 people a year, and that might still be occurring. But they can't agree on the solution. I think the way a lot of Americans feel about this issue is it largely shakes out into two positions. On the one side, feel like the problem is not being taken care of, and so someone has to do something about it. The other side feels like the root cause of the problem might be in US demand for drugs, and military action might have the opposite effect of destroying the cartels. The stakes are high, and so are the risks, but the reward of being rid of the cartels is one that I think is worthy of cooperation.
Ideally, I would like to see America and Mexico work together. But the Sinaloa cartel lost one of its spotlight a long time ago because it became a corporate, not a drug trade group anymore. The C&J is the deadliest and has many of its founders linked with many U.S. and Chinese companies and industrial and tech companies. Yeah, and that's what we're talking about, or that's what this guy presumably was talking about with how the cartel is mixed with so many Mexican businesses, and if Americans work with that kind of business and they don't do their due diligence, they're basically working and funding with the cartel, and man, right now, this next 4 years is going to impact a long road down the line. I think we're going to live through a very historic 4 years, for the better or for the worse. But let me know what you guys think. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, then please like the video, subscribe, and if you really like it, then share it with some of your friends. My goal here is to spread a positive message while sprinkling my 2 cents on big topics like American, Indian, and world geopolitics, and even small stuff like Twitch drama and online debacles. And if you want to see it live, come join me over on Twitch, twitch.tv/ActuallyElrod. That's where I'm going to do all my reactions, and after the reactions, that's where we get down a game. And if you're like, hey, I have a video that I want this dude to sprinkle his 2 cents on, then come over on my Discord and let me know and join the community there. And while we're at it, I have to say thank you to everybody who has made that Discord just so poppin'. I never thought I'd have a Discord that's so flowing. It's really cool to see. Shout out to you, Bobby, Omni, Demon, all of you who have been in there who are just super active. Logie, you're the man. Logie is the one who's like modding and helping run the server, so thank you, Logie. Lastly, I challenge you. I have a challenge for you. Make somebody laugh today. We all know there's enough hate and vitriol in the world. If energy is contagious like the flu, then let's spread and get everyone contagious with our positive energy, right? Not negative energy, because there's so much of that. And if we could just be a small little change in someone's day, then you never know. Maybe that's the thing that starts shifting this world to a happier, healthier, just better place. And with all of that said and done, thank you guys, and I'll see you on the next one.